On what seemed to be an ordinary Christmas night, what secret lies behind the mysterious figure of the little boy at the door? What is the red object in his hand? Why did he vanish into thin air at the call of his mother? Explore the unknown, subscribe without pause. Don't miss an episode, click subscribe to join our adventure. We lived in that house for about 14 years and I saw my fair share of creepy stuff, but this story it definitely sticks out the most. A little bit of background. First, though, so I was around 7. I don't exactly remember the age, but only the present that I got that year. I know that I was old enough to use the bathroom at night alone, but still young enough that my mom usually checked on me to make sure that I got back into bed. Okay, I also know for sure that it was Christmas Eve. I know this because our tree was always off at night, except for on Christmas Eve. Our house was pretty small, 850 foot small, but I loved it. When you walked in the front door, you were immediately in the living room. Straight ahead was the hall. In reality, though, it was just a small rectangle that had doors on 3 of the 4 sides from the living room or the front door. You could see into the bathroom, heading to the bathroom. You had a closet on the left, my bathroom door, my bedroom door to the right, an empty wall with the width of the door, and my parents' bedroom door as well. The kitchen was off of the left of the living room and shared a wall with the bathroom in the closet. It was super cute and just really cozy, and we also had an unfinished basement with the stairs in the living room by the kitchen door to the back porch. Now I got up to use the bathroom Christmas Eve. I got up from my bed, went out of my bedroom door and turned the corner into the bathroom. I, of course, being a kid, had to peek at the tree in the presents underneath. I thought that I saw a monster truck at one point at the time. I was a huge fan and really wanted a remote control one, but I didn't stop to look because I really had to go. After I finished up my business, I got up and looked towards the living room. I really wanted to peek at my presents again before I went back to sleep. We didn't really close the doors in my house growing up unless we had people over, so I could see the front door and the glow of the tree from my seat. I looked back at the toilet to flush, and when I looked back up at the doorway, between the hall and the living room, I saw the silhouette of a boy. He looked about my age from his height, but he had his back to me, so I'm not sure what his face looked like. He was standing in the doorway, using his left hand to hold the door frame so that he could lean into the living room on his tiptoes and peek at the presents. I think in his right hand he had what looked like I don't know, like a red sucker or something. His whole body was dark because of the lack of light, and the Christmas light shining behind him. I shuffled to the edge of the bathroom, so I was just inside the doorway. If I had put my arm straight out, I could have actually touched this kid. I'm standing there about to ask what he's doing when he slowly drops back down to his flat feet and starts to turn to face me. Now, as he starts to turn, I get the most intense feeling of dread, fear and anxiety rush over me. I can see the profile of his face and he's just smiling, staring straight ahead, just as he's about to get all the way around. My mom walked out of her room and asked me if I'm okay, and in the split second that it took to look at her and back at the boy, he was now gone. I instantly felt better, and it was as if he just never even existed. I pointed to the living room, and my mom assumed that I was trying to peek at the presents, so she just tucked me back into bed, and I fell asleep pretty quick. Woke up, and I totally forgot about it. The next morning I did get my remote control monster truck that year too, which I was super stoked about, and it was years before it came back to me and I told my mom about it. She wasn't surprised too, because well, like I said, a lot of weird stuff happened in that house. Before I got my car in my freshman year of college, I would use Lyft to get to work pretty much every day during the summer. During the winter or fall though, I just walked even at night, and in all of those Lyft cars and drivers I never had any noticeable encounters. I guess I've probably been in a couple of hundred by now, and aside from the occasional political opinion and speeder, it was all fine for the most part. Now one day I order a Lyft car like normal, it'll be here in like 7 minutes cool. I walk outside a couple of minutes early to go and wait for my driver, and I see a vehicle that pretty much matches the description of mine sitting in my driveway. You know, that sort of little car icon next to the profile that you can use to compare the real one. Well, it was the same color, the same size, and unless you notice the little details, it pretty much looked the same. But my driver was still apparently 2 minutes away. I choose to ignore him, thinking that it's just a funny coincidence and maybe he's a friend of a neighbor or something. But then he rolls down his window, looks at me, so I go up to talk to him. Maybe he's just lost, by the way too, a different race entirely from my actual driver. So I know for sure that it isn't him, but it's similar skin tones and age. I guess he tells me that he's my driver and pulls out his phone. That has my profile, like how your driver has to make sure that it's you. So, in my naive and innocent teenage mind, I think to myself, oh, Lyft must have accidentally sent me to driver and tell him that he's not the driver that I was told I would meet. Right as we are talking, my actual driver pulled up and rolled down his window. I explained the situation and said that I'll probably get in the first Geist car because, well, he was here first, but then my actual driver says that I should probably go with whoever is on my phone. That sounded pretty logical to me and made sense, but before I could turn around and tell the other guy that I was going to go ahead and pick the other guy, he drove off tinted windows. By the way, it wasn't until I got into the car that my driver brought it to my attention. How weird that actually was. He told me that in his 10 years of being a Lyft driver that nothing like that had ever happened to him or anyone that he knew. Then it suddenly dawned on me about what might have just happened: the similar car appearance to my actual driver, the fact that he had my info, but I didn't have his, the fact that he was there a couple of minutes early. So if I did get in, it wouldn't have intercepted my redriver and just everything, and stupidly I almost got into his car too. I went to work and I was totally shaken up that day. I tried making a report to Lyft, but without any evidence or information other than a basic physical description. There really wasn't much that they could do. My Lyft driver said that he would go ahead and tell the story to some other driver friends on a social media forum, Facebook, probably so that they could spread the word, and so I guess that made me feel a little bit better about the whole thing. But that driver, he might have actually saved my life that day, and I think about him a lot. And hey, my dad heard about it too and got me a car in the end. So I guess at least I got something other than trauma. I've also only told a couple of people in real life, due to the traumatic and scary nature of the whole thing. Looking back on it now, it was most likely a trafficker or kidnapper. These guys probably have access to Lyft servers and look for repeating customers like me. I've since deleted the app and my account, but I guess the lesson from all of this is always check the license plates growing up. I didn't know if spirits or ghosts were real. My mind was open to the idea, but I had never experienced anything to believe it anyways. I was 23 when I first moved out of home to my first apartment. I'm 28 now, so this was some time back. I will say that living there for the most part was pretty normal, but on a couple of occasions there were some moments that sent chills right down my spine. The first time I was chilling with my lady friend, we were just laying on my couch watching a movie or something. The kitchen was small, so looking at the TV you can see the whole kitchen. I had a cheap trash can where the top lid spin, so to dispose the trash, you can just throw it in. We were just chilling and out of the corner of my eye I see the lid spin a few times, as if someone slapped it to make it spin. I noticed it, but I didn't say anything. My lady friend then asks me like 10 seconds later if I saw that. I was like, holy cow. I wasn't tripping. We investigated the trash and nothing. At first I thought maybe a rat jumped onto it or something. I mean, we didn't have a rat problem, but I had no idea what else could have done that. In short, we had no idea what the heck it was and we were quite shook for a while. The second moment, though, it genuinely made my heart sink, and I've never felt that feeling ever since then, so my girlfriend, she would come over a lot. This was after my lady friend. I'm not a cheater or anything, but she, among a few of my other friends, always told me that my apartment had a bad vibe to it. Like the energy in there was sort of dark. I didn't think much about it, but we had these two stuffed animals that we wanted a claw machine at our local arcade. After some time of her feeling uneasy for some reason, and we both concluded that those stuffed animals just gave off bad vibes, she removed them off the bookshelf and put them in my kitchen cabinet before I left for work that day, just to put them away for the time being. Keep in mind, I dropped her off at her house and she didn't have a key to the apartment, and I always double-locked it. Fast forward a bit. I get back from work and decide to take a nap. I laid on my couch and the way that I was laying, the bookshelf was in front of me a bit to the left side of the wall. At the time I was having a lot of sleep paralysis. I still do from time to time, but in hindsight I did experience a lot of sleep paralysis in that apartment for some reason. So of course I'm waking up in sleep paralysis mode, my eyes open, unable to move. I look and all I see are those two stuffed animals sitting in the exact spot that they were. My first thoughts were, what the heck? How the heck did those get back on there? It was impossible for those things to get back on that shelf unless they walked back there, which obviously is impossible. Or is it? My heart sank into my gut. I felt my skin crawl, and that feeling of unease just took over my body. After I was finally able to move, I called her and asked if she put them back before we left the apartment, and she swore up and down that she didn't. She couldn't believe what I was telling her, as we were both in disbelief. I disposed of those two stuffed animals in the big trash, this time, certain that they would never pop back up again. Now I still consider myself a skeptic, as I never again had any other experiences with what I believe was paranormal, but the couple of times that I did it was at those apartments. I actually had a friend who grew up in them, and she told me that they were definitely haunted. She's seen and heard things there too. But anyway, I should have probably mentioned too that at one point my girlfriend claimed that she one time saw a big shadow figure above me. It was allegedly in the corner of the ceiling, and I vividly remember her looking up to and telling me to. Of course, when I turned around, there was nothing there, but I did feel my skin crawl a bit after. She told me that she used to stay there when I went off to work as well, and always told me that she just always felt like she was being watched. It was the main reason that I started dropping her off back at her house when I would leave for work. I was working at a small business in Iowa when a man came in for an interview. He was polite enough, but didn't really say much, but something about him just felt really off. Well, my boss interviewed him. I stocked shelves listening to the men answer our standing questions. What's your availability? Have you ever been arrested? Things like that. When he left, the manager asked me what I thought. There's something weird about him. I got really bad vibes about him. The boss kind of chuckled at me and said we can't deny someone employment because of bad vibes. I took out my phone and Googled the guy's name, and he had been arrested a few months prior for threatening to shoot up a gas station. After being accused of theft, he lied and said that he had never been arrested. Is that good enough reason to not hire someone? It was, and as it turns out, it may have actually saved my life. I remember September 2018, a beautiful clear day, the calmness broken by the sound of police cars flying down the road. A student had been murdered in the middle of the day on a nearby golf course. She had passed a group of men who very shortly later found her things abandoned on the ground. Concern. They called management, and shortly after she was found, her body floating in a pond. Everybody was in shock. This was the second murder of a young student Iowa had in just a few weeks. Was it a disgruntled fellow golfer, a jealous lover? No, the young woman had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She did not know her killer. He did not know her. He was a homeless man who was found in the woods by the golf course, saw an opportunity and he took it. He had fantasies about these sorts of things, and the next day the story made headlines, and plastered on the front was the killer's face. My stomach turned when I saw him, because he looked just so familiar. I didn't recognize the name, but then again, I've never been good with names, but I remember stories, and so I googled his name, and the same story about a man being arrested for threatening to shoot up a gas station came up. And instantly I knew who he was. It was the same man that I had convinced my boss not to hire at the job the majority of shifts. There were only 1 or 2 of us working, which means that I definitely would have been alone with this guy at so many points, so many slow hours, with few customers, so many blind spots. There would have been hundreds, possibly thousands, of opportunities to be alone with him. It only took a few minutes for a murder to occur on a beautiful day on a golf course. So how much more opportunity would there have been if he had been hired? So yes, do trust your instincts, because if they are anything like mine, they may just save your life one day. I have no idea what to do. The last month has been filled with fear and paranoia. You see, I had this incident around a month back. I don't know what the time in the night was that this happened, but I'm certain that it was in the AM. I just woke up with this feeling of dread and fear. My room was lit in a dark blue from my LED lights. Near the door to my room stood my mom. I called out to her quietly as she approached the foot of my bed. Slowly it became evident that it was not my mom, only looked like her head began to tilt slowly as she stared at me. I moved to the foot of my bed to kick her away, but my fear went completely through her. She then disappeared and reappeared at the side of my bed, and began approaching me closer as quickly as she appeared. She then disappeared. I told my dad about it, but he said that it was just a nightmare. So I pretend like it didn't feel real until that same day. My friend and I were driving around. I've always known that she was a bit of a medium, as we are both paranormal investigators. However, this really cemented this for me. You see, I didn't tell her anything about this thing's appearance, but her eyes widened and she quickly drove out of the neighborhood that we were in. She was repeating to herself, saying we have to get out of here. She later described exactly what was there with me in my room, from the clothes to the height. That night we went to a Catholic church and we prayed. I've been praying every night since then, and I haven't been able to have the lights off at all. Everything was quiet too for a while, until the last 5 days, because 5 nights ago I then froze in my bed. I was laying on my stomach, and I felt a hand press on my shoulder. I couldn't move, but the same sense of dread filled me. 4 nights ago. I was laying on my side when I felt something brush my hair out of my face. Once again, I couldn't move. 3 nights ago, I was laying on my side when I felt someone laying behind me. I was completely frozen in fear and dread. The last 2 nights have been sleepless, and even last night I cried to God begging for protection. So my question for all of you guys is, does anyone know what this thing is or how I can protect myself, or maybe even get rid of it? So I've had several supernatural experiences, and I figured that I would share some that have stood out. I worked as an officer at a prison, and although I've moved on to a new facility, I have been an officer for the past 12 years. One of the major skills I've learned is how to retain and recall details, which helps recount events that I witness. This makes report writing much easier, and is helping me recount these events here as well. The prison I worked at was the oldest operational in my state, and was built in the 1870s in an old style with a big brick wall that runs the prison's perimeter. The place has been updated over the years, but some areas that still operated had little done to them since it was built now. When I started, the old heads told all of us that the place was haunted, given everyone who had died over the years. Different places, more than others, like the old unit that was a segregation, or what some people might know as the hole with all the prison graffiti here. I never gave it much thought, because if I do not experience it then it is just a cool story, but not confirmed now. I worked there for around 8 months when I first saw something strange. I was working overtime at night on what's called a one-on-one, where you have to watch a prisoner who is feeling suicidal and make sure that they don't do anything. It meant that I needed to stay up all night and check to make sure that the prisoner was breathing every 15 minutes, and I had a partner who walked by every 28 minutes, so I knew that I was awake. It was about 2 a.m., and I had just used my flashlight to illuminate the cell of the prisoner that I was watching and confirmed that he was breathing. I looked down to mark the check on my clipboard, and I saw movement out of the corner of my eyes. My partner had just done his round 15 minutes prior, and all the prisoners were supposed to be locked in their cells, so there shouldn't be any movement down there. I turn and see someone doing a round on the housing unit, but he isn't right. This guy is wearing a blue uniform with a Breton cap shiny black, with the belt, and has a baton in his hand. The problem is that these uniforms haven't been used by my department since the 1950s, and our uniforms are not blue. They are grey and modern, whereas this one was very much old. I watched this guy walk down the unit for maybe 5 seconds, and then I shook my head and slapped my face to make sure that I was awake when I looked back. There was no one there anymore. The next thing that happened was roughly 2 years later during my normal shift. Now the central building of the prison I worked in is a big room called a rotunda. It has 2 floors, but it is open, so you can see the balcony up on the top levels, and anyone who was leaving the rotunda can be seen from the opposite side, even on the balcony. The doors into the wings that branch off the balcony all have windows, and most of the rooms directly connected have windows too. It was maybe 2:100 and I was going to the rotunda to complete some paperwork with a co-worker for my sergeant, which is pretty common, as we were opening the open bar gate to go into the rotunda. I looked up and I noticed that the administrative wing lights appeared to be dimmed through the window into the door. I commented to my co-worker that we would need to report that a light was out in the administrative wing. It was then that we were both looking at the window that we observed something move in the window, and we realized that this was not a light malfunction, that instead a shadow person, or something like that, was standing in front of the window. While we were watching this shadow move to its left and through a solid wall into another room, we saw its silhouette through the window of that room. Well, we just looked at each other and we kept going. The third experience that I had. I was about 3 years in as an officer. By the point that this one happened, I was working the 3rd shift in the control center, which is where we use the cameras and security measures and all that also. I should mention that there are several rifle posts around the prisoner's perimeter that are used to ensure the security of the prison, but we only ever used like 3 of them during operational hours in this case. It's important that you know that. In this case, it's important for you to know that when a phone is left off the hook, the phone rings into the control center so that we can address the issue. When the call rings through, you can pick up the phone and hear anything on the other end that may be being said in the area, which is important in case we're dealing with a staff assault, or a hostage situation, or something like that. So I'm working as the electronic monitoring officer, which means the camera controls are my main responsibility, along with the perimeter security. As I'm working, the phone rings and the institutional caller ID says 1 post, which is odd because that post is not used because it's too small for a modern person to comfortably fit inside of it. Also at this time, there is nobody that should be near it, and for someone to reach it, they would have to set off at least 2 security alarms, which I was in charge of monitoring. Given the fact that the guy who was doing the perimeter checks was a bit of a prankster, I guess you could say I figured that it was just him playing a prank, and that he knew a way around the sensors somehow. So I answer the phone and all I hear is static, which is continuously increasing and decreasing in volume, like someone has an old television on a static field channel and is moving the volume up and down constantly. I hang up the phone and move the camera to look at the post, and I can see right inside there that there is no one in there. As I'm looking at it, the phone rings again, as an off-the-hook at 1 post. This time my lieutenant picks up the phone and after a minute walks back to me asking if the perimeter officer is playing games, because he can hear mumbling blurred out by static from 1 post. He sees that I have the camera pointed at it and that there is no one in there. The lieutenant tells me to have the perimeter officer check it, because an animal may have gotten in the post and knocked the phone off the hook or something. The officer took a while to get there, as they had been on the other side of the perimeter, and he had to climb 5 flights of stairs to get there. During this time, the phone has continued to ring from one post until I can see the officer opening the door, at which point the phone just stops ringing. The officer opens the door with his flashlight on and calls over the radio that there's no phone in the post. My lieutenant responds that there must be one, because the caller coming through. In response, the officer holds up a disconnected phone line so that the camera can see it and says that is the only thing in the post. This post has not been used since like the early 80s. I think, like I said, it was way too small of a space. The phone would still ring now and again on the 3rd shift until we updated our phone system to an internet-based system, upon which it stopped this next experience. I had been an officer for about 4 years. At this point I was working my regular shift as the electronic monitoring officer. I went on a restroom break, which means that I had to leave my post and go about 100 yards away to the nearest restroom. As I'm in the restroom, I distinctly hear the sound of boots clapping on the tile floor of the hallway that leads to this restroom, among other rooms in that wing. As the sound gets closer to the restroom, I can hear the large folger keys that are clinking together on their waist as they walk. When it sounded like they were right outside the door, I called out saying I'll be out in a minute, and I didn't hear the sounds. After I said that, thinking that someone was waiting outside, I hurried up and washed my hands, not taking more than a few minutes. I opened the door and there was no one there. The hallway is long enough and has 3 entry doors that I would have heard open and close, as well as any other door in the hallway, to where they would have had issues getting out of the hallway noiselessly. In the time between me calling them and leaving the restroom, I returned to my post and I asked my sergeant if he saw anyone go into the wing while I was down there. He said that he didn't and asked why. Knowing that he was someone who believed in ghosts. Given that he and I had talked about how he used to do independent paranormal investigations. I told him what happened. His face went slack and his eyes got large, as he said go check the video. I returned to my position and watched the video of that hallway, the hallway of the wing above that one and the areas outside the wing, and I confirmed that no one was in that area during that time except for me. And there were no signs of distortions or anything. Now the final one that I'll share for today is that I had been an officer for about 6 years, and was working my regular shift. I was watching the medication lines after the Dino lines were done and my sergeant was talking with me. Not like a management thing, but we were friends and just wanted to have a conversation while ensuring that prisoners weren't passing meds or fighting or worse. The medical hallway that I was watching is connected at one end to the rotunda, and at the other end to one of the main housing blocks, specifically right next to our main segregation unit. As we were talking, we heard what sounded like muffled talking from a radio. Checking our radio, we realized that it was none of us, so we began searching the area around us. Given the location, there shouldn't be an unattended radio, so it was a security issue and of some concern. As we proceeded to search the area, we realized that the intercom system speaker for the segregation unit was making the sounds. This intercom, unlike a standard housing unit, is not used frequently, which is why we were surprised to find a transmitting sound. The sergeant points at it and says that it must be broken. The switch is in an off position and the activation light is off. I looked closely and I got goosebumps, as I made a shocking discovery saying SGE, how is it doing that when it's not plugged in? I held up the unplugged cord leading out of the Interon box and gave it a slight tug to show that it was attached directly to the box. The sergeant's face went completely white and he walked off shaking his head, just saying nope, over and over again. These intercoms don't have backup batteries or anything to it, and there were no direct power-up hookups or anything like that. Just the cord that I had already shown was disconnected. The sounds though they continued for the duration of the medication lines. I left the area after that and I never heard of it doing that again. So that's everything that I've experienced. But if you guys would like to hear more of the other stories that I've heard from there anyway, just let me know, and I'll be sure to share some more. Thanks for listening, and if you're interested in doing a job like this, please do not let stories like this get in the way, because it really is a very fulfilling career. So this all starts with a guy named Daniel, was at one time an acquaintance of my ex-husband. He was never my favorite person honestly, as he was kind of an incel, I guess. A lifelong drug addict and also had a chip on his shoulder because his family had money. He was a liar, thought that he was slick and did creepy stuff, like once I came home, and he was folding my clothes out of the dryer. I don't know why he thought I would approve of such, including folding my underwear into tiny little squares. With a lot of care, you get it though. Daniel is a loser, and look, I know that's mean, but he really has no redeeming qualities. Thankfully, after a while, their associate friendship runs its course and he sort of fades into obscurity, as a bad memory, like he very little concerning him for the next 10 or so years. Save one thing, he has lost his mind, but that's just a throwaway statement. A lot of the times so and so has gone crazy and lost their mind. I had the thought that he'd always been like that and forgot about him once again about 2 years ago. I pull up to my house, though, and notice a side-by-side sport utility vehicle in my driveway that I've never seen before. When I walk in, I see this unkempt, wild-eyed looking man that appeared homeless. Really, I followed my husband to our room and whispered, "Who the heck is that guy?" And he looks surprised and says it's Daniel. He's well sort of insane now. Apparently his family keeps him in the house, mostly because he doesn't do well in public and freaks people out now, but he stole their side-by-side and drove it over an hour to our house, where he has run out of gas to go back home. I instantly get a bad feeling when I see him before I even know it's Daniel. This guy's aura is just all wrong. His vibe is messed up and I get even more and more wigged out the longer that he is here, because he's having a full-on conversation with Well himself. This was sinister, and I didn't like his replies to whatever he was talking to as well. Whatever was speaking to him was saying hostile things about us, for example. He listened intently, then laughed wildly and shook his head. "No, they ain't like. That is funny, though, like what the heck, right? I'm just trying not to make him feel any type of way, because I know that this may not be something that he can control or help, and I don't want to make him uncomfortable or embarrassed, but I'm getting more and more uncomfortable myself the longer this goes on." Finally, after like 20 minutes of talking to something, he sort of looks at me sheepishly and says, "I apologize, I have demons, but I'm working on that." I nod and tell him that I understand. My husband rounds up some gas by his side-by-side and then he leaves at first. I'm really relieved because I was feeling really freaked out by the time that he bounced, when I knew that he was gone. I was sitting on my bed doing some craft project, and my husband is in the master adjoined bathroom, doing something with a tool. I then quiz him, what the heck is Daniel talking to? He tells me that he believes that he's talking to demons that follow him and tell him things, and so he was speaking to a demon with a phone conversation, at least in his mind, which heightens my bad vibe meter to the max. Let me tell you, I tell him that I don't feel comfortable with him in my home. I don't want him back here, where me and my children are. He's dangerous. I do pity him, but I just instinctively know that he's dark and dangerous. My husband says okay, and he doesn't think he'll be coming back anyway. Quite suddenly, though, I then feel a pain in my arm, like I cannot describe, for a few moments. I really think that my husband has accidentally shot metal across the space with whatever he was doing with that buzzing Dremel tool, and he's just shot the heck out of me. I put my flat hand over the inside of my arm, below the elbow and above the wrist, and put pressure, but it doesn't stop. Intense pain, a weird pain like I've never felt before. I scream. I moved my hand to look, but don't see any blood, so I couldn't have been hit with shrapnel from this tinkering or anything. But I did see sort of half-moon claw prints dug into my arm, like someone had grabbed it and just sunk their nails into it. Not scratched, just dug in. There were at least 40 to 50 between my inner rest and her elbow, and to my horror, I literally watched while Mo appeared right in front of my eyes. I yelled for my husband to come here, and I showed him my arm, and asked him what it looked like to him. "Dang, who clawed you up like that?" was his response. I shook my head and said nobody, and explained what had just happened before they appeared out of seemingly nowhere. What he did next sent a chill down me. "Daniel didn't leave his demon here when he left, and it's clawed you up, did he?" jokingly said with a little laugh. He was kidding, but as soon as he said it, I knew that it was true. It didn't like me talking about Daniel like that, and it clawed me up to punish me. I told him not to say that, and I quietly freaked out about it until I went to bed and tried to keep it off my mind. A couple of days later, we were laying in bed, and my husband was spooning me with his arm draped over my side. He had just nodded off when I felt that weird otherworldly pain in my side under his arm, and I just knew that it had clawed me again. I cried out and shook him awake in a panic, and I asked him to move his arm before raising my shirt and asking what my side looked like. He looked crazy and said it looked clawed up like my arm had, and he watched me while more claw marks sprung up until my side was covered in them. Honestly, he was pretty much as shook as I was. Well, almost throughout the next few months, I always felt like I was being watched too. I would randomly get this same weird type of pain followed by some type of mark in the pained area. I basically had to exercise my house over and over. It would work for like a week or two, and then it would always come back. Not as strong, but it definitely kept coming back. Looking back, I sincerely believe that Daniel isn't just hearing voices that aren't really there. I think that the demons that he says that he talks to are exactly what he says they are. I think that the one that he dragged up into my house that night either decided I was weak, and it would get to me, it saw something in me that it liked and wanted, or it sought to me for talking about Daniel the way that I did. Whatever the case, it was seeking only me, because nothing had happened to anyone else in the house. There was also a lot of DV in our home, and I was the victim of it. I think that it was feeding on the negativity in the home. I felt like it was always just on the edges, lurking or waiting to be able to get back in to get to me, and it was awful. I've since divorced and moved on, and I came to a better place spiritually. But this experience taught me that what you don't believe in you cannot defend yourself from, and I, for one, will never make that mistake again. I'm 30 now, but this happened when I was 16 and it has just always stuck with me. I was playing some OG Paper Mario one afternoon after school, and as I was playing, I heard my mother call me from downstairs. I paused and called back, "Yeah, what's up? Come down to the office please. I need help with something." "Okay, I'll be right there," I said as the good and helpful son that I was. I went downstairs to the office to find it empty. Confused, I went to the kitchen, my mother's bedroom, or all the places that she'd normally be. I even went to the garage to find that her car wasn't even there. I went to the living room to find my father reading the paper. I asked him where Mom was and he said that she wasn't even home yet. I stood there for a while processing that information before my dad asked what was wrong. I told him that I definitely heard Mom asking me for help. In the office, he simply shrugged and said that he didn't know what to tell me and went back to reading his paper. So yeah, something called out to me in the voice of my mother asking for help, and my mother definitely wasn't home. The whole thing has confounded me to this day. This is going to be a little bit lengthy, as this has been an occurrence in my life over the course of the past 10 years, so I apologize for the length of this now. I'm a believer in the paranormal world, due to other experiences, but I am also open to the fact that this could be sleep deprivation, or stress-induced, I guess. But the moment of times that I've dealt with this and the fact that I have been consciously awake every time, it definitely makes me wonder. I'm 30 years old now, and my first encounter began in 2012, while I was a freshman at college. I was on academic probation over a long weekend, so the rest of my roommates were gone for the weekend, and I was stuck in my dorm for the weekend all by myself one night, as I had finished my homework, and was tired of mindlessly scrolling through my phone. I got unusually tired and fell asleep in my bed at around 8:00 p.m., with the lights on. After about 20 minutes into my snooze, I felt like I wasn't alone all of a sudden, and just sort of jolted awake. Now our beds were over our desks in a sort of bunk configuration. I rolled over and looked into the middle of the room below me, and was shocked to see a humanoid figure curl up into the fetal position. I honestly thought that I was dreaming, so I just continued to blink and rub my eyes, and was telling myself to wake up, but soon realized that I wasn't dreaming at all. After about 30 seconds, it seemed to register that I was staring at it, and it slowly stood up. I was in complete utter shock and I just froze. It looked just like a person, but with no face or hair features, no clothes, just humanoid opaqueness. I guess I couldn't even discern gender. It was about 5 feet 9 inches and slowly walked towards my direction. Nothing felt evil or malicious about it, but I didn't want to test that theory by any means. Unfortunately, it was between me and the door, and I had to run past it to escape my room. I yelled at it to stop approaching me as soon as my fight or flight instinct overrode my being frozen in fear, and as it was only 3 feet away from me, I jumped from my bunk onto the floor and bolted past it. Mind you, it never reached out or interfered with my escape, as I ran into the halls of my dorm with pure adrenaline and fear, but with it being awakened and there was hardly anybody present, but I cooled myself down and quickly walked to find the closest human contact that I could find. I finally found one of my friends down the hall, who was still present as to not sound insane. I didn't tell the soul of my experience. I chalked it up to being tired and stressed with school, but unfortunately I had to eventually make my way back to my room to sleep alone again. I finally summoned the courage to leave my friend's room and go back to mine. After a few hours I entered my room and there was nothing there. I stayed awake with the lights on for the rest of the night with an uneasy feeling, but nothing else happened. Fast forward to 2013, my roommates and I had switched to a different room. Every year we had to switch rooms. Nothing else had happened until late fall, and this time all of my roommates were present and it was a school night, and we had all just begun to fall asleep, 3 of us total. Once again I got that uneasy feeling and once again I rolled over to find that humanoid figure standing near the head of my bed, reaching up towards me. This time I absolutely freak and wake up my roommates who throw the light on. As soon as the light came on, it had disappeared. To my roommates' justifiable annoyance, they told me to go to sleep and that I'm just imagining things. This occurs 2 more times throughout my culture, as with the last college incident occurring in my senior year. Once again, I was asleep and awoke to an uneasy feeling. I had accidentally left my closet open, and as I peered into it, I saw the figure again just standing there, staring into me. I fixate on it, just telling myself that it's just my overactive imagination. But as I was wishing it away, it stepped out of the closet, and, just like the other times, it begins to approach me. I scream at it, demanding it to not take a step closer or else, and then it just disappeared into nothingness. I then graduate and joined the military, thinking that it was just college-induced stress. I felt like the encounters would end, especially with me leaving my old dorm for my first duty station in Florida. At this point I'm engaged to my now wife and have 2 dogs, and to shorten the now long story, the shadow people, they would continue to follow me. It didn't matter which apartment or house I would move to. I would never be able to escape the terrifying encounters of whatever these things are. It would always start with my dogs growling at our bedroom doors and then full manifestations. My wife would awake me to, shouting at something demanding it not to come closer, and to leave me and my family alone. It would absolutely freak my wife out, as she could not see the figures I was confronting each visit. It would just get a little closer before disappearing after I confronted. It would always get close, but it would never actually reach me. I could also sense that it was never the same shadow person, and each subsequent visit it seemed more foreboding and with negative intent. It also had this weird sort of pull to it as well, like it was drawn to me. This happened about 4 or 5 times from 2017 to 2019, and this leads me to the final encounter that I had in 2020. My wife was pregnant with my son at the time, and I was a month out from deployment knocking out my pre-employment training. This last encounter was different from the rest too, and was the single most terrifying, paranormal, or stress-induced event that I've ever witnessed. I was asleep with my wife in my bed. I had only been asleep maybe an hour when I woke up because I couldn't breathe. I had felt 2 hands wrapped around my neck and weight on my chest as I struggled to breathe. I saw the shadow person above me this time, and it felt like it was trying to suffocate me. I hadn't even registered it as a shadow person. I thought it was a home invader. At first I wrestled with it, or at least it felt like I was, and I could feel it and grab it this time. Once I got the upper hand, it sprung to the bedroom floor and crawled under my bed. My wife was already awake, as I was thrashing about thinking that it was an intruder. I was trying to find a weapon and told my wife to escape the house and call the cops. She of course refused and told me that it was all a bad dream. I looked under the bed to find nothing there. Of course my wife told me that I was just stressed with the upcoming deployment. I was incredibly embarrassed and utterly terrified. I saged the house just in case and tried to work on my stress, and weirdly enough, that was the last encounter, and I haven't had another one since then. Now I know that this could all be psychological, but it doesn't take away how terrifying it is in the moment. Of note is the fact that I'm never half awake. I'm always wide awake. When I went through these encounters, I don't have sleep paralysis, and I don't sleepwalk. I hardly tell this story to anyone, unless they are a believer in the paranormal, as I know that it sounds super made up, and I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't gone through it. I just know what I experienced and how it made me feel. Most won't believe my story, and you know that's fine. I'm sharing this to see if anyone else has had a similar experience with shadow people, or could explain the psychological reason, if there are any. I guess the only thing that would go against that psychological reasoning is the fact that my dogs, they always seem to react to it as well. This happened when I was 15 and my little sister was 12, a little bit of backstory here. We lived in this small town for several years, and it was a very safe place. A few years into living there we had a cop with his wife and kids move in 2 houses down from us. Our house was built sometime in the 1920s. I think a few nights before this incident, our other siblings locked us out of the back door. Us being idiots. We kicked the back door and the door didn't budge, but the frame came out of the wall and the door was just hanging there. One of our blinds were broken and we didn't have the money to fix it, seeing as my parents had 8 kids and money was really tight, growing up anyways. The blinds were broken behind our TV. On the other side of the window was a garage, and our driveway next to the driveway on our neighbor's property, which was abandoned and had tall shrubs. What we didn't know was that there were 2 people hiding in the shrubs watching us. I'm going to leave a few details out to make a long story short, but if you have any questions then please do drop them below. My little sister's name is Candace and my name is Aria. So it was the summer of 2009. My oldest brother and his girlfriend were a mile from a house fishing about 10 at night fishing right. All of our siblings and parents were asleep. Besides, my older brother out with his girlfriend fishing. I was sitting in front of the TV watching it. Candace was sitting in the bed watching TV with me too. When all of a sudden Candace and I heard a very loud crash noise from the back door. We both screamed. We got up, ran to the phone and called our brother's cell phone. He said that he was on his way because his girlfriend apparently twisted her ankle. He gets home and by this point we woke everyone up in the house and had all the lights on. My brother tells us to stay in the house. My brother is 6 feet 4 inches and 300 pounds. Unknown to my family, I slipped outside to check with my brother. I know it was stupid of me to do this, but I was a curious kid. I saw my brother being really quiet. He ran back to our fenced-in backyard, and he gets within arm reach of this guy and he steps on a stick. The guy turns and looks back at my brother and takes off running and hops the fence, and he got away. Sadly, I unfortunately didn't see all this because I went back into the house after a while. This is just what my brother told me. But my brother comes in and he tells everyone that he saw a guy all in black, and he's about 6 foot, and that's all that he saw. The rest of the night was pretty much calm. My brother on high alert, though the next night my brother was out with his girlfriend wherever they were at the time. It was again about 10 at night. Candace and I were watching TV again in the same spot as last time again, we hear a loud crash coming from the back door. We screamed again, and called our brother's cell phone again, and he came home again. The whole house was awake again, and all the lights on. My brother goes out and checks it out, and this time, he didn't see anyone out there. Oh, I forgot to mention too. Both of these times we looked at the back door, and both times the back door looked like it was kicked really hard. This time around the frame was out of the wall more, and the door was leaning further into the house. At this point we didn't make a police report because we had a cop that lived 2 houses down from us, but while he was at work, us kids would help take care of his pregnant wife, bring her over food, play with her kids and all that. We really didn't see him much, and when we did he was really sweet and nice, but anyways we told the police officer what had happened. He told us that he thinks that there are 2 guys out there, and that they've been stalking our house and watching us. The cop comes over and checks and looks. He said that one of the guys seems to be on lookout, and hides right here in the shrubs. He keeps lookout while the other one does the possible breaking in. He said that they had to have been looking through our broken blinds. He said that at night they could be looking in, and you really couldn't see anything if you were looking out. After those 2 nights there was no attempted break-ins anymore, but fast forward to the fall of that year, and our cop neighbor told us so. I'm not actually supposed to tell you all this, but we actually caught a peeping Tom. He's in jail now, about 20 or so miles away, and he said that after this peeping Tom got caught that perhaps that's why everything stopped. That is, he suspected that this guy was the guy trying to break in. He said that the town was safe again because of this, and Candace and I were really freaked out and kind of scared to this day. How and I always have our windows and doors always locked. We check multiple times a day. In fact, if any of our curtains are open, we get scared and we close the curtains every time. I'm honestly afraid that it'll happen again one day. We no longer live in that town, but that thought is definitely still there to this day. We don't know what their intentions were. But I do think that if he would have gotten in that there's a very good chance that we wouldn't be here today, and that is a scary thought. I grew up in a small Southern California town known for its orange groves. From days gone by all those groves have been replaced by housing developments and also shopping centers now, but there were still quite a few around. When I was growing up in the late 90s, my friend Johnny and I used to get into all kinds of trouble back, and we were just general miscreant, I guess. But there was one time that I truly believe that we almost became victims of a child predator. If anyone listening to this also grew up in the 90s, then you know that it was a different era. We'd be out all times of the day and our parents would have no idea where we were, and there were lots of kidnappings back then too, and I can remember multiple times that I was offered candy or asked by some creep to help him find his cat. I always said that I'd go and check with my mom, and by the time that she'd get outside ready to whoop some butt, but they'd always be gone anyway. Johnny and I were up to no good. One day after school, like always, we were traying around this orange grove that bordered his street. We started pulling these little metal dam things off of the irrigation channels and tossing them WLY. All of a sudden, though, We heard a sharp whistle, and both looked up to see this man about maybe 25 feet away from us, wagging his finger and going, but his reaction was not at all proportional to the property damage that we were causing. He clearly didn't own or work in the grove, because instead of screaming, scamming at us to stop, he had a grin from ear to ear, and I can still see his face in my mind all these years later, and it gives me chills. Johnny and I stood there for a second watching this guy. Then we looked at each other and Johnny looked back toward the guy and shouted, "Run." I look over and the guy is in an all-out sprint toward us. Now, despite the physical exertion that he was putting into his sprint, the grin was still on his face. Johnny and I ran harder and faster than we ever had before. We made it out of the grove and back to his house before noticing that the guy wasn't behind us anymore. The video ends here, but the story continues. Subscribe to us and don't miss the next mysterious chapter.